registration. And John,
Yeah,
the minister is a member of the group.
she sent me a screenshot which says looks like you don't have the Teams app yet, which I'm a bit confused about. But fortunately, her husband is an IT professional.
Of course, yeah, of course. Yvonne is an expert.
Ewan is she's seeking assistance from him now. So hopefully it won't be too long.
That's fine.
Yeah, I can say the minister is about to log in now.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Minister, kia ora, good morning, welcome. Please unmute so that we can hear you. Still can't hear you. And if all the others can mute their microphones, please, because we're getting a lot of feedback.
What about now, Venkat? Can you hear me?
Oh, excellent, excellent. Kia ora, Minister. Good morning. Welcome. Very nice to see you. Many thanks for your time. I understand that there were a few technical glitches.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that. Finally got there in the end. So thanks for the second link.
Yeah, that's fine. That's more and more people are joining, Minister. But then we know that we have limited time with you. So, if with your permission, I would like to start. Kia ora katoa. Welcome all of you. And there are many people who are joining offline. There are this group has around 48,000 members, although not all. A large number of people will be listening in. And we also made arrangements for not only live streaming, but also to put this on YouTube so that people will have the benefit of what the minister has to say. And also we have, thanks to the minister, we have two senior officials from Immigration and Border Control. Andrew Craig, an old friend of ours, is the manager for Immigration Policy. And Stephanie Greathead, who is the national manager for Border and Visa Control. Welcome to all of you. We have requested people to send in questions so that we are not deluged by people joining in and talking at the same time. So the questions are with us. Understandably, a few of them are on immigration and MIQ, and there are a few others which directly relate to the minister. Minister, may I, on behalf of the group and on behalf of Indian Newslink, your old friends, say how delighted we are to have you with us this morning. And we strongly believe that these kinds of engagements from time to time will enable people to understand what the ministry does and the thinking of the government, because the whole lot of us see you as the face of the government, because you're not only the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Ethnic Communities, Community and Voluntary Sector and Youth. You're also the first person of Indian origin to be a Minister of the Crown, and that makes us really proud, and you're holding a position which is very dear and very important to all of us. So with that, Minister, I would like to briefly ask Nitin Suri, the IT brain behind the whole program today, to say a few words, and then we will proceed with the rest of the morning. Nitin.
Hi all, I'm Nitin Suri. I'm the IT manager by profession. I'm a moderator and one of the chief architects of Indians living in Auckland, which is one of the biggest groups representing the Indian diaspora in New Zealand. Our group provides a social media platform for Indians in New Zealand to highlight the issues affecting the Indian community and also enabling the members to provide help and assistance. On behalf of our group, we welcome the minister. Back to you, Venkat.
Thank you, Nitin. Before I request the minister to give an opening statement, after which we will deal with some of the questions, I want to introduce everyone to Rachna Tata, the spirit and the initiative behind this morning's program, and also Indians living in Auckland, which is, as Nitin said, perhaps the largest group. It's reaching around 48,000 members. Rachna is a media. Her experience is in media, insurance, and other industries, and she was the president of the Zoroastrian Association, which represents the Parsi community in New Zealand. And she's a Rotarian, almost by profession, because she devotes a lot of time for community work. Rachna, over to you quickly. Please unmute.
Yeah. Good morning, Minister. We're delighted to have you with us today. And thank you for taking the time off your busy schedule to address the Indians living in Auckland. This is the Facebook group, like everybody has mentioned, which is representing 48,000 Indians in Auckland. And we think, it is the face of the Indian community in Auckland. For our discussion, we had opened up the questions to our members, and we have actually picked the most frequently asked questions. These would be topics, that are discussed today, and the issues which concern our members most, Minister. So to start off, because I'm aware of the very short time that we have with you, I'm just going to go straight into the first question. And
before that, Rachna, just a minute. Before that, Minister, can we invite you to give an opening statement so that you can say a few things, then we will start. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Venkat. Thank you also to both of you, Nitin and Rachna. Kia ora koutou to everyone who's listening. Can I just say thanks for the opportunity? It's not one that I've done before. I've done a number of Zooms and interviews and so on, but I've never actually spoken to a Facebook group previously. So thanks for the opportunity. I just also wanted to quickly acknowledge that given that this is a group that is particularly focused in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and we've been in lockdown for a long time, it has been tough. So I just want to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone who has been complying, who's been staying home and, saving lives, or been on the front lines, and also those who've been part of the vaccination program, just outlining at the outset that our rates for our Indian communities across the country and across Auckland is high. So thank you for everyone who's been part of that. There is a bit more work to be done, particularly in the 12 to 34 age group for our communities. So just a plea right there at the start for us to keep going and to support that particular age group to get vaccinated. Going back to, of course, the Prime Minister's announcement just this morning on the new protection framework that is reliant on a high level of vaccination. So just very quickly putting that out there. I thought I would just take a minute or so to outline the new Ministry for Ethnic Communities, given that it has just been about 3 months since its inception and is directly relevant to members of this group, of which I am one as well. So no stranger to this group. I've been on there. And I know, Rachna, you've tagged me on a number of things in the past so that I've been able to respond and engage as well. And I thank you for that as well. But the Ministry for Ethnic Communities was established on the 1st of July this year. It's something that many from our communities have called for over a number of years, if not decades. So huge thank you to those who've been part of that call. And I was incredibly pleased that our government responded to it and established that. It is, of course, the first time that we have this level of representation across the public or in the public sector. It's the first time that we have a CEO, Mervyn Singham, who sits at the top table with the CEs of other public sector agencies as well. So an incredibly significant move for us. The ministry is in the process of transitioning from the office to the ministry. The transition process from a technical point of view is largely done. Aspects of it continue. Where we are now, of course, is we have engaged widely at the start of the process to determine what the ministry's priorities would be. I was determined that those would reflect what was most important for the communities it serves. And so from that, we landed on the 4 that were raised the most and seem to be the most significant, and they are about promoting the value of diversity and ensuring that we take steps to be more inclusive of our communities into wider society. It's about ensuring that government services are equitable and accessible to our communities, improving the economic outcomes, including addressing the barriers to employment, and there's already work underway in that space, and working in a way or connecting and empowering various ethnic community groups as well. So just very quickly, there is an employment action plan underway, and hanging off the priorities, a strategy and an action plan that the ministry is working on, because we want to make sure that we take tangible steps that will actually make a difference to the lives of the people we serve. Both of those are being consulted on at the moment. So if anyone is keen to have their say, just head to the ministry's website, and it's all online. There are some face-to-face engagements happening till the 5th of November as well, I understand. So do get in touch with that. Outside of that, very quickly, the ministry has already been very active in terms of working with our communities and the Ministry of Health on the issue of COVID, ensuring that messaging reaches different communities in a way that's relevant to them, working on various issues that crop up like access to food security, working with health to ensure there's funding for groups that want to make sure that their COVID messaging or vaccination messaging reaches the harder to reach populations as well. The Ethnic Communities Development Fund was increased 8-fold in the last term, and also in the last term before the transition to the ministry, we'd already pretty much doubled the resourcing of the entity. All of that is to make sure we have the capacity to engage with our growing ethnic communities, but also to feed back what we hear to influence policy priorities and change across the government sector as well. So I'll leave it at that. I also just want to acknowledge our immigration officials who are here on the call. I know that immigration continues to be a topic of great interest for our communities. Since it's not my portfolio, while I might be able to shed some light on the thinking behind some of the steps, for the detail, we've got officials, senior officials on the call. So a huge thanks to them as well. Back to you,
Thank you very much.
Rashna and Venkat.
Thank you very much, Minister. Just to get set with the first question, and of course, you know, it is an immigration question. It concerns the community greatly. We've heard of the one-off pathway to residency, but, you know, knowing the large amount of Indian students that live in Auckland and New Zealand, this is a question that kept coming up, you know, when we threw the floor open to people. Will the government consider international students in New Zealand for the one-off pathway to residency? As you will appreciate, Indian students are really anxious about their future in our country.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rashna. I have also received, as other ministers have, and predominantly the Immigration Minister, numerous emails from international students who are, you know, I can understand that anxiety. I was once an international student myself. This particular one-off 2021 resident visa, I might just preface it by saying that it is an incredibly significant policy, and I don't think the significance has been lost on anyone. Definitely since the borders were forced to close as a result of COVID, but I think even more broadly in recent times, this is significant because it affects about or impacts about 165,000 people. It's meant to provide some certainty both to migrants who've been contributing, particularly in the last 20 months, to New Zealand's success in this in these COVID times, but more broadly over the 3 years that they've, or more years that they've been here. Also provide some certainty to businesses that have been asking us for that. So that's really where the policy comes from in terms of its inception. It really represents a wide range of skills across a plethora of sectors, you know, the health, aged care, teaching, primary industries, construction, manufacturing, and so will be significant to us as a nation as well. Now, when this was being, and I'm quite happy for immigration officials to step in as well, but what I will say is that when it was being considered, it was about all those things that I've just mentioned, those who've been working here and therefore on a work visa and contributing in that sense. And it was meant to those who had presumably, and many of these in the 165 would not necessarily have had a pathway to residency, but it was really meant to be targeted at those who did have that pathway. Bearing in mind that those on visitor visas and student visas don't necessarily have a pathway to residency. And I speak from experience. When I came many years ago to New Zealand as an international student, my focus was to get an excellent education, which I did. It's never guaranteed that you have a pathway to residency when you come on temporary visas like those, unlike some of the work visas that do have a more straightforward pathway. So that was really the thinking behind that. Also, we needed to make sure we could do this quickly and keep it simple. And so a line needed to be drawn somewhere as well. Just checking if immigration officials did want to comment on this. I can't see them on the screen, so I'd be relying on you to make sure that.
They're right here. Stephanie and Andrew. Andrew, perhaps?
I think the Minister's covered most of the points. Yes, I mean, this has been focused on the work visas. And I think that's that point that Minister Farfoy has made a few times. This is not the end of residency. You know, people who come to New Zealand are getting a good degree, are getting skills that will be useful, can get employment in the New Zealand labour market, can show that actually there's a role they can perform in the labour market that can't be filled by New Zealanders in the short term. They might in the future be able to qualify for both temporary work visas and then eventually residence. We are looking at, as Minister Farfoy has said, the skilled residence settings more generally. This buys us some time, so it means while the queues have been cleared, other things are being looked at, we can just have a look at, well, what is New Zealand's position in the future about what is the nature of the skills we want to identify and retain in New Zealand as part of both our economy, our labour market and our culture, basically. So we will be looking at that, but I think the students, as the Minister said, they weren't in scope for this, but again, if they've got getting a good degree or a good diploma or whatever it is, getting good skills that are useful to the labour market, then they should be thinking about, well, what is that pathway to having those skills that will, in time, give them pathways to residence.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Venkat, is there anything you would like to add?
No, that's fine. I think immigration is an issue which can be kept on. You can keep on explaining, but because of paucity of time, let's move on to the next one.
Okay. I've
got questions to ask from the Minister, which is not immigration oriented.
Right.
Later on.
Okay. I'll move on to my second question, Minister. You have been very sympathetic about migrant workers stranded overseas. When is the government announcing plans and strategies for their return?
Thanks, Rashna. Yes, that is another question that I get asked a fair bit, and I do have a huge amount of sympathy for those who are caught in this position, and many of them, as in the case with the international students, many of them have reached out to ministers and members of parliament more broadly and told us what conditions they're in or what their situation is, and that's where my sympathy comes from, reading their stories. Now, bearing in mind that the border closures that happened last year were because our border still represents our primary line of defense against COVID, particularly now, I think, as people can see how we're grappling with the Delta variant of the COVID as well, it still remains incredibly important for us to maintain the integrity of. That includes, of course, the MIQ facilities and the capacity therein, plus our broader health sector as well. And we need to, from a government point of view, manage all of that to make sure that firstly we can meet some of the demand of those who have a legal right to enter New Zealand, and that needs to be managed incredibly carefully in terms of just the numbers and the demand or the pressure that puts onto our border system and our health system more broadly. And so that's what we've been grappling with, and of course a changing economic landscape and labour market as well. All of those need to be managed as we make decisions about the border. Within those, the government, and I know the Immigration Minister regularly monitors the situation, as immigration does more broadly as well. And we have made changes over the course of the last 20 months that, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie and Andrew, but that have let about 17,000 people in across the border, despite the conditions that we've been in and the sensitivities that I mentioned as well. And I know that continues to be regularly monitored, and changes will be made in a way that is both fair and safe. So that is currently the position that we're in, and that's why it's been difficult for those stuck in the position that you've mentioned as well. Anything that Stephanie or Andrew would like to add on that score?
I think that's a good point, Minister, and I think what we've seen in giving advice, and we got the lucky job, we just have to give advice to ministers. Ministers are the ones who have to make the tough decisions about the numerous really strong cases across families that are split, critical workers, New Zealanders trying to get home with only so much limited capacity. We did put in place a border exception, I think it was midway through last year, for people who had been normally resident in New Zealand. And we, unfortunately, that couldn't be everyone who was working in New Zealand, just again, because of the MIQ capacity pressures. So we did set a threshold, I think it was 2 years in New Zealand on a pathway to residence of some description, and or 1 year with family in New Zealand. I think about 800 to 1,000 people got through that border exception or accepted. I haven't got the details in front of me. So there has been a recognition that there were some people who really had lives in New Zealand, got caught on the wrong side of the border, and we've done something to that. It didn't capture everyone, and as the Minister said, it's unfortunate that in this really tough time that the border can't, facilitate everyone to get through. Would like to, but the Ministers are aware of those groups and do continue to consider options.
Right.
So, Minister and Andrew, perhaps you can tell us, do you have an idea how many people are stranded overseas and how many have actually been granted exemption over the past year? Just the numbers for us to report.
I don't have those on me at the moment. And
no, sorry, I don't have them either. I know. No, I'm just speculating, so we won't go into speculation. I know we did get a chunk of them, but there are still a lot more overseas.
Can you look at it and send some information to us later on, Andrew?
I'll see what I can find. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
What I will say to add to that as well is that, there's been a huge amount of consideration given to how we support the well-being of temporary migrants who have been stuck here as well, right from the start of this process, from the time that we knew that flights were, the conditions were so, for want of a better word, iffy, that people couldn't get back home, and we needed to make sure that we, changed things so that they could have employment here and that their well-being was looked after when people were in hardship as well. So I'm just going to point to that work that has been done for temporary migrants onshore as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Minister, as we have all realized, the current MIQ system has not worked well. It is also keeping a large number of Kiwis stranded overseas who are now desperate to return home. Will the government consider self-isolation, and how soon is it likely to happen?
Yeah, look, the MIQ facilities, and I had, at various points of over the course of the last 20 months, also looked at, again, just bearing in mind this doesn't sit in my portfolio at all, but out of interest have looked at criteria for facilities to become MIQ facilities, and that was largely in my role as a local MP when I was approached by, for example, hotels that wanted to be part of that program. And I know that criteria is stringent because of the health implications of them not being so. So you've got to have the safety concerns, the health concerns, and measures that, facilities will be able to put in place to keep people safe in order for them to qualify to become MIQ facilities. That then means that we've got a limit in the facilities that can become MIQs, and therefore limits on MIQ capacities more broadly. That has been changed and increased over time dramatically since I looked at the criteria at the start of this process as well, but of course keeping safety in all aspects in mind. Now, that being said, our demand for people, and we've seen that every time spaces are released, demand for New Zealanders wanting to return home is high, and that needs to be managed in a way that is safe. In saying that, there has been thought given to other ways in which we might be able to manage that. You've mentioned self-isolation. There is a self-isolation pilot that is currently being announced and will lose track of time sometimes in lockdown. So if it hasn't already kicked in, will kick in very, very soon. And I know that consideration was looked at that pilot, and if it was successful, being able to scale it up in a way that's safe as well. So definitely different options are being considered. Some are being trialed already. All of it needs to meet public health tests and measures, because safety of everyone who's here in New Zealand is absolutely paramount. And the government's always had a focus on saving lives and livelihoods through this. That hasn't changed. You'll see also from the PM's announcement this morning on vaccinations being key to the new protection framework. vaccinations, it's the best tool that we have currently, and that's why we're pushing for everyone who's eligible to get vaccinated, both so that we can get back to some sense of normalcy, and further down the track when it is safe that we can start easing up some of those border restrictions, of course. As the PM has said, though, that will be absolutely the last once we've sorted everything else out.
Lovely. Venkat, anything for you here?
No, we're running short of time, so
Yeah,
please
okay.
get to this thing.
All right. Now, Minister, the next question that is on practically every Aucklander's mind. The whole country, and Aucklanders in particular, are now very anxious about continuous lockdowns. It has affected, as you would imagine, all levels of society and all communities. Can we expect any good news today or anytime soon?
Yeah, so at 10 a.m. today, the PM laid out a new COVID protection framework that would kick in once our vaccination rates were high enough. The decision that Cabinet has made around that is for every DHB to reach a double vaccination rate of 90%. And that is to ensure a huge amount of thought went into this, and we've tested it with various sectors as well to look at how we can transition away from the alert level framework that we have currently, which uses some of those harsher restrictions that you've mentioned, so level 3 and level 4 lockdowns that, as you've rightly pointed out, those of us in Auckland are very familiar with. And, all of us want to get away from that. There's no two ways about it. We need to do it in a way that is safe so that we don't get to a point where we see hospitalizations increase and deaths increase as well. We've done well so far to keep both down. That's largely because of those strict public health measures we've had, because those are the only tools we've had over the last 18 to 20 months. Now we have vaccinations. That is our best tool to ensure that people can protect themselves, their loved ones, their families, their communities. But in doing that, we needed to look at, government needed to make sure that the target was solid enough to ensure that we don't see increases in COVID spreading in certain areas. And so we wanted to make sure that that target was across the board, but it was put in place in a way that was meaningful. The new protection framework, and I completely appreciate that it was literally just announced an hour and a half ago. So I would encourage people to just jump on the Unite Against COVID website. It is what some in the media have called a traffic light system. We call it a protection framework, but it really lays out the different levels, red, amber, and green, and how we use vaccine certificates in various sectors to manage restrictions, basically. So off the top of my head, and I'm going to be very brief about this because I've only just looked at it properly myself as well, but basically businesses, for example, can be open at green and amber levels, and I think some of them at red as well, but with restrictions like vaccine certificates in place. So basically, general premise is if you're going to ensure that all your customers are vaccinated, then you can stay open for some of those sectors. In terms of the detail, I would encourage people to go and have a look at that, and if they want to know whether their sector or their industry and what the expectations would be at each of those levels, go and have a look at that framework as well, and feel free to ask questions if some of it's not covered, bearing in mind that this is also a work in progress. Some of the details that sit beneath that will be announced as and when they are they've been confirmed as well. So, and that was a very long-winded way of saying, yes, we are transitioning away from lockdowns, but we need to do so in a way that is safe, and we will only do that when we reach a 90% double vax target for all DHBs.
Correct.
Yes,
that will
Minister,
also be looked at again on the 29th of November by Cabinet. So.
Okay.
So we'll also be putting out an analysis in Indian Newslink of the PM statement. Like you said, that it's very, very new, and it will take us some more time to read it and then report on it. Rashna?
Yeah. Okay. Minister, in regards to ethnic communities, now that is a ministry that you represent. Now, especially the Indian community who have a moral, cultural and social obligation towards parents and elders. We look upon it as, a duty to look after parents in their senior years. The concept of parents living in retirement villages is still an alien concept for us. So with, keeping that in mind, there is extreme concern for parents stuck here and the ones who are overseas because of travel regulations. So our members also want your insight on the parent residency visa, and is this category likely to open anytime soon?
Yeah, look, I understand the rationale for those questions. As someone who's very much in that position myself, I understand it quite intrinsically, really. And you'll know that the parent visa was actually part of the Labour Party's manifesto prior to the election as well. So definitely one where we understand the concerns that sit behind these questions. We understand how important it is, and really the wider benefits for us to have, for our families to be able to have their parents here. However, the COVID outbreak, and now particularly the Delta variant, has thrown a bit of a spanner in the works with the border restrictions as well. So I know that is something that is still on the Immigration Minister's radar. We have had conversations about that, and I see Andrew nodding. So I'm very pleased to hear that. But it is something that we will have to get to. You'll appreciate that there's a fair bit on the minister's plate at the moment to work his way through.
Lovely.
Andrew, would you like to say something?
Probably nothing to add. Yes, I mean, it's something that is on our work program, but as you've seen with the recent residence announcements, we've had quite a lot of big projects, so it will just be a matter of when that works to it, and also when the border's enabling those kind of travels to occur anyway.
Excellent. Thank you. Minister, as the Ethnic Communities Minister, would you also consider financial support for community organizations who have been unable to organize any community events due to lockdowns, and raise much needed funds for their activities? Because, as you would imagine, they have lost sponsorship, they have lost ticket sales. So is there anything that your ministry is looking into?
Look, that would sit largely either with, if they're a service provision agency, that would sit within the contracts that they hold with other government agencies, MSD, for example. And I would encourage them to have a conversation with their liaison person. We have invested more broadly as a government to ensure that community organisations are able to function and provide the services that they do throughout the course of COVID, and particularly when lockdowns ensue as well. And there's been a significant investment in that, regardless of whether the community organisation sits within the ethnic communities landscape or not. In terms of community events, are you meaning some of the cultural events that we've had to cancel, the festivals that have been ongoing and so on? Or?
Well, I'll give you an example, and this is based, more on sort of the community that I represent. As Venkat mentioned, I've been ex-president of the Zarathustrian community that represents the Parsi community. Now, a very small chunk of, what we do comes out of, membership fees, which is, very, very nominal. But then, we have various programs throughout the year, which are sort of, our fundraising activity. Now, all that has stopped completely. And as a result, we've had to stop, say, certain activities that were ongoing for all these years. So, is there anything that, they can reach out? And I'm sure we are not the only community that's facing that. So is there, some avenue that we can look at to just keep our normal activities going?
Yeah, look, I mean, what I've heard is that for most community organisations that I've interacted with, most of those activities, given that they can't take place face to face anymore with alert levels, have become virtual. So the cost has actually been minimal, or less than it would have been outside of a lockdown situation. But look, if there are specific issues that you'd like for us to look at, feel free to send me an email with a little bit. I might need a little bit more detail to work that one through. Yeah, so feel free to send me an email. It's just priyanka@parliament.govt.nz, and we can consider different circumstances as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Minister, for thinking of that. Now, my next question goes on to, of course, that's something on everybody's mind, the huge impact that lockdowns have had on our SMEs, our hospitality industry, and the business community. And as you can, well imagine, the Indian community is well entrenched into these, vocations. Many will collapse because of the financial burden they are under. A long-term support plan is required, the community feels that they need to be supported. Can you share what the government plans to do around, a long-term, sort of plan which allows them to get back on their feet?
Yeah, look, I will also point to some of the announcements that the Minister of Finance made today, and that would be particularly relevant to Auckland businesses as well, given the period of lockdown, but also as we transition into that new protection framework that I mentioned earlier. So there is a substantial boost to the resurgence payment support that I think, will be welcomed by the business community. From memory, there is also a package that will look at supporting the mental health of small business owners, because I know, and it's been raised with me by some of my local businesses, that this has had an impact, of course, on them as well as it has more broadly for those of us living in Tamaki Makaurau. The details of that from memory will be worked out with the likes of the Auckland Business Chamber of Commerce and the EMA as well, to make sure that it meets the needs of the business community. So there has been and there continues to be significant thought that goes into how we can support what the Minister of Finance has called throughout this viable but vulnerable businesses. Those that would have been viable, but for COVID, the decrease in revenue and the impacts that lockdowns have had on them. Of course, the transition away from lockdowns altogether, level 3 and level 4 restrictions and the new protection framework will allow many businesses to operate at various levels, given some public health restrictions at some of the higher levels when there is community transmission happening. But really, the bulk of the thought that has been put into that framework is also about allowing our business communities or businesses to stay open at various levels. So really looking at balancing that plus the economic support that businesses might need. And some of the long-term supports, to your question around long-term support, there's been a fair bit over time that the Small Business Minister has announced as well to support businesses, whether it's from the digital infrastructure point of view. And I would really encourage people, if they haven't already, to jump on business.govt.nz and have a look at what's already out there to support them.
Okay. Lovely, Minister. Thank you very much. We're running close to our, time off. Now, the Indian community, we understand, has reached 100% of the first dose. Now, would you have any sort of, percentage figure for the second dose?
I actually do have that. Let me just have a quick squiz. Yeah, so you're right. It's increased from 92 to 100%. The uptake rate for dose 2 has increased from 72 to 82%. So a bit more work to be done there, and just bearing in mind that people, after 3 weeks now, people can have their second dose. So do have that, so you're well equipped for summer. But the areas of focus really need to be, as I mentioned, that 12 to 19 and 20 to 34 age bracket, which the rates there, at least this is the most updated figures that I have, and the rates there sit for 70% for that 12 to 19 age group and 78 for the 20 to 34. Of course, bearing in mind that, that age group sort of was eligible for vaccinations in the 4th phase of the rollout, by and large, so might be lagging behind a little bit in that sense. But really, if parents, grandparents could work with their younger members of their families to talk to them about the vaccinations, that would be really good. Bit of a focus on all the young people in your lives.
Excellent. Minister, on to our last question now. Would you like to share with us any areas of immediate concern for your ministry or issues that you're looking to address? So we're throwing the floor open to you.
Thank you for that. Quite a few different things, but I think what I will, in the interest of time, I might just emphasize the fact that we want to make sure that we get the strategy for the ministry and the action plan right. So I would really encourage people to jump on the website or contact the ministry and have your say, so that we can collectively get this right and ensure that we do improve outcomes genuinely for our people. The second, in the same vein, is the Employment Action Plan as well. Employment has been raised time and again as an issue of significance for Indians and more broadly our ethnic communities as well. I'm really keen to get a sense of whether the actions that we are proposing will actually make a difference for people. So again, please have your say on the action plan. Tell us what you want us to change and whether what we're suggesting will work for you as well. Some of the other areas that I'm looking at, and I'll touch on this very briefly, is about leadership. So for the first time ever, our government measured ethnicity data on public sector boards and committees in 2019. We've always known anecdotally it's low for ethnic communities. We saw that in the numbers. It was about, I think, 3.8% at the time. We measured it again last year. It had increased by about 1 percentage point. So trending in the right direction, but really not good enough for a community that represents close to 20% of New Zealand's total population. This is an area, public sector boards, where I feel I can play a bit of a role to try and lift those numbers, but equally for us to ensure that we build a pipeline, a sustainable pipeline pool of talented, skilled individuals from our communities who can represent at various levels, including public sector boards, and to support them to be able to do so. The Ministry has signed an MOU with the likes of the Super Diversity Institute and Leadership New Zealand. They've got a 12-month work program to ensure that we do this and we support people from our communities to get to various levels of leadership as well. So, and they run a nomination service. So anyone who's interested in playing their part, please do contact the ministry and get on that nomination service as well, so that we can collectively raise those levels. Look, there is so much I could keep going, frankly, in terms of the work that the ministry is focusing on. But I think I've already outlined the priorities for the ministry. The next step is to actually make sure that we get the action straight so that we can deliver for ethnic communities, the communities we serve.
Thank you.
And vaccination rates. One more plug.
Of course. Minister, thank you. Before you go, can I ask Stephanie, you haven't said much. Would you like to say something about MIQ, border control, visa control, which concerns most people?
Thank you for the opportunity. No, look, most of the questions were about policy, which is certainly my colleague Andrew's space. So thank you for the opportunity, but there's probably nothing more for me to say, unless you have a specific question, but that's it. Thank you.
This lottery scheme, as they're popularly called, is this working, Stephanie, or is it creating more heartaches for people?
I think you're asking about the ballot system for MIQ.
Yeah, correct.
Definitely presidential control, that's a different part of MB, so we probably can't talk to that. I think, there's challenges with the MIQ that, again, finding a good system is there, but sorry, that's not our area, so we can't really say much about that.
On an average, how many people are coming in every week, Stephanie, under the MIQ?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't tell you how many coming under MIQ because I work for immigration as opposed to.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Okay. No problem. Wrong call.
I'll just say that the ballot system was put in place to try and make the system fairer for people who are trying to get in.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Minister, we can go on asking you questions. We are also the Minister for Community and Voluntary Sector. You are the Minister for Youth. But I do have the constraints of time. I have been told that you had only 45 minutes. You have already spent 48 minutes. Unless you have 1 or 2 minutes to say on your own what you're doing as the Community and Voluntary Minister.
Yeah, look, I'll give you the highlights in the next 1 minute. In the CVS portfolio, one of the main things that I'm doing is a review of the Charities Act. That is the legislation that really lays the framework for charitable organisations in New Zealand, of which we have many thousands. And so that framework, there are a few things that we can change to ensure that we make the regulatory system a bit fairer for particularly smaller charities, but we get the balance with fairness in a more streamlined process for them, but equally ensure that the public have trust and confidence. So the system needs to be fair and easy, but robust enough for the public to have confidence and trust in the sector more broadly. So, so that'll be coming through. I'll be taking a paper to Cabinet reasonably shortly, actually, and work will be underway, and we're hoping to introduce legislation to the House next year on that. So that's probably the main piece of work there. I am also looking at volunteering rates and what we might be able to do as a government to support volunteering across the board as well. That's underway. The other thing that I will mention with the youth portfolio, one of the main things is the youth plan, which is one of the action points of the child and youth wellbeing strategy that the PM leads on. The youth plan is one of them, and it brings together a number of different government agencies to ensure that young people have their voices heard in decision making, particularly decisions that are to do with COVID and the impact of COVID on them, and that government agencies work in a way that they can take the youth voice into account in decision making. I could frankly go on because there are some pretty amazing initiatives that sit in that space, but that's for another time. The final point that I'll make is this, as Associate Minister for Social Development and Employment, I lead a work program that looks at strengthening social cohesion. It has come directly out of the recommendations of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks, and it looks at what steps government needs to take collaboratively with communities to build a framework so that we've got a tangible set of steps that we take to strengthen cohesion. New Zealand is considered largely as a country that has a high level of cohesion, but we don't want to take that for granted. That has been consulted on as well till the end of the month. So if anyone's interested in having their say, the discussion document is on the MSD website, so please have a look. It affects all of us, includes ethnic communities and faith communities, but it goes to diversity much beyond that as well. I'll leave it at that. I'm also conscious that it's not just my time, it's your time and our officials as well. So I'm just going to say a huge thank you for the opportunity to do this to all three of you, Venkat, Nitin and Rashna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We've loved having you here, and the transparency with which you spoke. We would love to have you here again, and hope to have more fruitful conversations continuously with you. Thank you for your time.
Great.
And thank you everybody else.
Minister, thank you very much. Stephanie, Andrew, and all the participants, Nitin in particular, Daryl Garcia from Indian Newslink, who is somewhere behind the scene. Minister, thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us, and we hope we can make it once a quarter or once in 4 or 5 months so that you can come and talk to us and allot a little more time. And we promise you that we'll ask better questions rather than immigration. And with that, may I wish you a pleasant weekend. I know that you spend a lot of time reading cabinet papers during the weekend, but do relax. And it's very nice having you. As usual, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Minister.
Likewise, Venkat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
See you later.
Bye-bye.